You can't make it sound like you're in the moment because you don't want to be deceptive at all. It would have to be, author X, spoke, they probably mentioned your name too. Uh, as a matter of fact, you might even want to be part of it. Spoke to Ray Elman when they attended the Miami blah blah and 2 years ago. I mean, you'd be transparent about, but
Okay.
that doesn't take away from the value of the content. You're just being honest about when and where it came from.
Oh, that's interesting. And so you could almost have, I don't know if this is a good example, but Susan Orlean is a good friend of mine too.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and not many people get to have Meryl Streep play them in a movie.
yeah.
Uh, but uh, let's just say it was Susan Orlean, and she said, um, Ray Elman interviewed Larry Wright at the Miami Book Fair, and I love what Larry Wright had to say about how did he, how was he able to get information from Osama bin Laden, and then you play that clip. Would that
That's
be
right.
the kind of way you do
That's
it?
right. That's right. You would need a framing for it. So if it was a podcast series, it would be if it was Susan Orlean, you might want to do like her her favorite female authors. Let me introduce me, Susan, to the female authors that I love to read. Many of them were interviewed at the Miami Book Fair. We're going to start today with person X. And she would do a little introduction to author X and start with, she began her interview telling us about her early child background in Tennessee. Boom, soundbite. And so you'd
Right.
have to script it like a real radio documentary. But you just can't be a bunch of random interviews because you need to communicate to your audience, what is this podcast about? Well, it's about Susan Orlean's favorite female authors, or it's about the famous science fiction writers you interviewed, or it's about the famous, actors from the 70s you interviewed. You'd need some cohesive framing for
Yeah.
season one. And then if you did other seasons, you'd find other framings.
I love what you're saying because, I've done enough of these that there's a lot of crossover. So for
That's right.
example, I've done a lot of terrific women writers, and there's a photographer that I met. I don't know if do you know Alec Wilkinson by any chance from the New Yorker? He comes to
No.
the Cape too. I mean, I've known him since the 70s on the Cape. And uh, Alec's wife, Sarah Barrett, is a photo editor for the New York Times, and she introduced me to a woman named Claire Holt, who is a photographer mainly for uh, journalism purposes. But she was having her first exhibition ever in Miami, and she wanted me to help her with that exhibition, with the details of it. And her exhibition was women writers. So it's photographs that she'd taken of, women writers. So there's a way of putting this all together that's pretty interesting. Also, I've done, I mean, you can't do this on radio, but I've done portraits of a lot of the people that are in these
Yeah.
stories.
Well, you could because you'd have a website that would accompany the podcast that would provide resource material, photos, graphics, video, everything related.
Yeah.
But as you're talking, what about the Miami Book Fair? Would they be willing to, if many of the writers are from that event, would they be able to sort of sponsor and host it and market it for you?
Yeah, possibly. And so I'm good friends with Mitchell Kaplan, who's the founder of the book fair. And he also owns Books and Books. He founded them both roughly 30 years ago. And he also has a film production company called Mazer Kaplan Company. And his latest film stars Kevin Costner and Diane Lane. So he's playing in the big time.
Yeah.
And he's a very close friend. So he would certainly listen to me. That,
I mean, because you could then do some current people too, like people who are appearing this year and next year, and it's good to sort of have
yeah,
some current people because then you can just include the interviews and if you have if this is the podcast from the Miami Book Fair, I mean, you might be able to host it, Ray, and that gets around this whole problem of, I mean, I don't know what you'd be like as a host, but you never know what anyone's like a host, but it has to be someone compelling that, I mean, why do I listen to Ezra Klein faithfully every week? Because I love listening to him. He's so smart. I could hear his mind working. He asks the questions I want. Why do people love The Daily? Because they love Barbara. People, it's really a lot about the host. So famous is good, but compelling is just as important too,
Well,
especially,
and people who are interested in literature in any kind of way know the Miami Book Fair because it's the biggest in the United States, and they have 600 authors here every year in a
well,
1 week period.
and they don't do a podcast. That's crazy.
They he's got something going. He might have a podcast from Books and Books as opposed to the book fair. So he's got something going on down there. But sometime have you ever come to the fair?
I have not, no.
So come down and stay with us,
Okay, when is
and
it?
we'll talk about Montreal. And it's
Endlessly.
it's it's in November. It's usually around the middle of November. So the weather's always great, and there's so much fun. I mean, it starts on a Sunday, Sunday through Sunday, and you'll have everybody from Salman Rushdie to Joe Biden,
Yeah.
among other things, but all kinds of people.
If see if you could get Kamala.
Yeah.
Her book is now trending on the New York Times bestseller list as the #1 book. So,
Oh, wow.
uh, yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to if I could. We just got invited to a 70th surprise birthday party in Hope Sound, Florida, but that's
Oh,
interesting.
oh no,
If you
Hope
could
sounds very cool. That's where
put her,
that first, yeah, it's not far from, it's about an hour from us.
yeah,
And that's where Tiger Woods lives, among others.
yeah, this is my friend who comes from an extraordinary wealthy WASPy family. But anyways, that's in December. But yeah, I mean, I'd be glad to come down and sort of, if you wanted to help pitch this, because the brand isn't his bookstore. The brand is the Miami Book Festival.
Yeah,
So you need a good brand behind something
yeah,
because one of the ways that you market, and this is a much longer conversation, is you produce something beautiful and brilliant, and then you go to every book podcast in the country and you say to them, okay, we have this really great episode. We're just starting this podcast. We have a wonderful episode with Salman Rushdie, although everybody interviewed him recently, but never mind that. Salman Rushdie, we would love for you to play this episode in your podcast or do a promo for it in your podcast. So then you gain all their readers. And what we do is we do exchanges and they say, great. And then in your podcast, will you play one of our episodes? So like one week when it's Christmas and you want off, like you play one of, if you could get into the New York Times podcast or one of the really book podcasts, the big ones, it's word of mouth trading that happens, but it's a longer conversation. But I would think rather than trying to do it independently, or you need to go to either the Miami Book Fair or FIU, or you need some institutional backing